If I were to describe the Legend of Zelda games in one phrase, it would be that they are my comfort food when it comes to video games, going all the way back to when I played A Link to the Past for the first time in the 90s, because in the grand scope of things, whether you like or dislike these games, it's hard to argue that at the bare minimum that they aren't by all accounts good games, and I truly believe there's two simple reasons for that. One is that they always try to throw in a big gameplay mechanic twist to spice up the gameplay, from an ocarina that controls time to a cap that shrinks you. These ideas almost always land. Second, the world and characters are constant. You almost always in Hyrule in some way, shape, or form, playing as Link, taking on a great evil to save the world with design philosophies that can make diving into a new Zelda game easy for both players and devs, because you already have a basic understanding on what you as a player expects playing as Link, and as a dev, you know pretty damn well what your players want from a Zelda game. But when I saw we were finally getting a Zelda game that stars Zelda, and yes, I do know this isn't technically the first game starring Zelda, but let's not talk about that abomination that was the Wand of Gamelon. Anyways, I was very excited, because Zelda is not Link. You could really make this interesting split in gameplay styles between the two, which I always imagine a game starring Zelda gameplay-wise would focus on her abilities with a bow, so basically her gameplay would be focused mainly on range combat, since Link's is always so melee focused. But little did I know, the kind of range combat we would get is this strange, almost monster taming like gameplay with a mixture of magic, which I loved the idea of it, and really found the approach to Echoes of Wisdom interesting. Unfortunately, while I did absolutely love this first true outing for Zelda, I can't help but feel it almost felt too safe. Like the devs didn't really want to get too crazy, even though they give all this freedom to you as a player, which is why this is just another comfort food Zelda game for me. With that said though, there will be spoilers later on in the video. I'll have it marked with a timestamp down below, so you have been warned. Now let's dive into the main mechanics that make the core gameplay loop so much fun in Echoes of Wisdom for me. So throughout your travels in Hyrule Kingdom as Princess Zelda, the main weapon you will be wielding into battle is the powerful Tri-Rod gifted to Zelda from her tiny little companion Tri, and it has three key abilities that all work together to make combat not only engaging, but the way you interact with the world around you as well. First off, you have echoes, which basically what these are is a mimic or recreation of either an object or enemy, and how you gather these is pretty simple. Anytime you kill a new enemy for the first time, they drop an echo of themselves that you can copy, which then allows you to use them. As for random objects in the world like a bed, they will have this golden glow around them, signifying that they can be copied by the Tri-Rod. Which, by the way, all the echoes you gather have different levels represented by these upside down triangles, which based on how many triangles your little friend Tri has behind him, represents how many monsters and objects you can create. So if Tri has 6 triangles behind him, you could summon 6 level 1 crows, or you could do 4 level 1 crows and a wolfos. Basically, you have to stay within the limits of Tri. If you try to go beyond that limit, your oldest creation will be automatically replaced, but this ability to mix and match monsters or even objects allows you so much freedom in attacking different problems in the world. Need to cross a gap or climb something? Try stacking beds or creating water blocks to swim through. Need some meat shields to protect yourself? Spam monsters to tank and attack. There's so much freedom in how you approach everything in this game, and I love it, which is even further expanding on thanks to the other two abilities of the Tri-Rod that might seem simple at first, but in practice have a ton of versatility. And how these two abilities basically work is Zelda will tether herself to either an enemy or an object, allowing her to do two different things. Bind, which allows her to push or pull objects and enemies around her, which by mixing this with the Echo's ability, you can do some really fun combos, like creating water blocks to pull enemies into to drown them, or you can hold enemies still while your Echoes attack them. And then the other ability, Reverse Spawn, basically allows you to be pulled by objects or enemies instead, and this also allows for some pretty creative gameplay as well. But that's not everything Zelda can do. She also has her powerful Swordfighter form in the interesting Automatons. Now I have to be honest, I feel pretty mixed on the Swordfighter form, and it's one of the main reasons I said I felt like the devs played it too safe. because the Swordfighter form is basically Link mode. You have an energy bar that depletes over time, and it allows you to basically run around and fight like Link using a variety of his weapons, which it really felt like the devs were worried that people might not be willing to dive into a Zelda game without that classic Link gameplay, and I do feel it takes away from Zelda's spotlight just a little bit. Though I will say there is a little more nuance to it than that, since the form is used in a variety of ways that aren't just combat related, though I do believe that its impact on the gameplay is lessened later on into the game. Like for example, starting out your energy gauge is very short, so when using the Swordfighter form, it really feels like you need to be wise with its usage since there's only two ways to gather energy. Inside the rifts scattered around Hyrule, which is done by defeating enemies inside these rifts, or by finding energy just floating around in the air of the rifts. Then the other way of getting energy is by visiting a smoothie shop and creating a drink that recovers energy, which this is also where you go to create your main means of healing Zelda, along with other beneficial effects through combining two items together to make a drink. Anyways, by halfway through the game, between your various upgrades you can do to your Swordfighter form, and the overabundance of supplies allowing you to basically have more energy than you know what to do with, this very scarce but powerful early game form that really felt like an important resource becomes just another ability that you can casually throw out there when you feel like it. Which what I wish they would have done is instead of having the Swordfighter form, you would have got an Echo of Link himself to use, and it could have been the only Echo that you could upgrade through the same means you upgrade your Swordfighter form. I just think it would have been a very interesting approach to not only the gameplay, but the dynamic between Zelda and Link as characters. Then if you wanted Zelda to have an aggressive form to transform into, you could have had her become Sheik and use something like a bow. But like I said, I don't hate the Swordfighter form. I had fun mixing it in with the various echoes I could create. I just strongly feel it was a safe choice by the devs. Now, switching over to the Automatons I mentioned, these are a little different from Echoes. Basically, you come across an individual who loves messing with machines, and through the use of your Echoes, you can inspire him to create these Automatons that almost act as super versions of normal enemies. But instead of creating them like Echoes, you have a set number of them, and you have to wind them up before they can start moving around. Which, if I'm being honest, while I find these really cool and badass, they almost seem like an afterthought for the gameplay, because all other abilities Zelda has can be used while on the move. But these require you to stop moving for a few seconds to wind them up, which at least for me felt a little odd in terms of gameplay flow compared to everything else. But like I said, they are cool and by no means takes anything away from the game, and I think that's a good way to sum up the primary gameplay of Echoes of Wisdom. All the individual parts that make up the gameplay can at times feel disjointed, like a pair of echoes that don't belong together, but when you hit that right combination, it feels absolutely fantastic to experience, and it feels like those combinations hit best when you're tackling the various rifts and dungeons scattered throughout the land of Hyrule. So basically your main objective in Echoes of Wisdom is to travel around closing these rifts that are opening up all over Hyrule that are absorbing both the people and the world around them. This is done by entering them and rescuing Tri's friends so they can mend the rift you're in, which there are two different kinds of rifts you will encounter. Smaller rifts that have you running around defeating enemies or moving objects to find his friends, and closing these smaller rifts reward you with both Might Crystals, which are used to upgrade Zelda's Swordfighter form, and XP for Tri, which the higher his level, the more efficient and things you can do with your echoes. Then you have the larger rifts, which are related to the main story and will have you venturing deep into dungeons to defeat a boss to save his friends so they can mend the rift. So basically the gameplay loop of the larger rifts is showing up to a place, helping out the people in trouble so you can access the larger rift, then venturing through a rift area so you can finally dive into the main dungeon. Which I have to say, I really enjoyed this gameplay loop and believe the biggest reason for that is how well the dungeons are designed. I genuinely enjoyed every single one of them. Even the water one was great, and we all know how water dungeons can be in Zelda games. But I think the reason for this is they somehow found the perfect balance of capturing that classic Zelda dungeon feel of exploring, backtracking, and fighting cool bosses while still allowing you to get creative with your tri-rod abilities. Like later on in the game when I was at the Pharaoh Temple, I somehow missed a staircase that was the most obvious intended route for you to take. Like it's right there in the open and I missed it like an idiot. So I was in this room that was clearly meant to be entered from the ladder on the bottom part of the room, but since I thought this was the way to go, I messed with my echoes till I found a way through. But doing this didn't break the dungeon. It's almost like the devs planned for someone to try this and designed the layout accordingly, so hats off to them. This is also why I found exploring around this Hyrule so much fun compared to almost any other Zelda game. Since at any given time, not including the Might Crystals, Heart Container, side quests, or even minigames scattered throughout Hyrule that reward you in one way or another, I could find echoes in the most obscure cave or area that could have a big effect on the gameplay that changed how I approach a variety of situations. And while you could obviously beat the game with probably a handful of echoes, if even that, I mean, who am I even kidding? Of course speedrunners are going to find a way to beat this game with no echoes, and I'll look forward to watching that. But just the pure fact that at any given time, I could find an actual tangible thing that actually had an effect on the gameplay just by exploring, made every moment exploring actually exciting for me. But as good as all of this is, there are some issues I had with the game, and one of them being very disappointing for me. But first things first, starting with some of the minor issues I had, the menu for selecting your echoes is just simply not good, or I should say needed some customization options because you could select them in one of two ways. First is by opening your main menu and going over to the echoes bar. This isn't terrible since the game will remember the last bar you were on, so it will always open up to it if you exit on it. Then the second is by bringing up a horizontal menu that has various sorting options, like last used and cost, which even though you can hold RB while in this menu to scroll through them faster, it's just really annoying constantly scrolling through endless amounts of echoes to get to the one you want. Even more so when you're in the heat of battle since it can disrupt the flow of combat, or it can even be annoying when you're trying to experiment with new combinations of echoes. So what I believed would have worked better is if they had two simple options available to the player. First is the ability to customize your horizontal bar, whether that would be through making a customized sorting tab where you could put whatever echoes you wanted alongside the other options, or by toggling echoes off in this menu so they just simply didn't show up in any of the sorting tabs. This would have went a long ways in giving the player more control over how they optimize the moment-to-moment gameplay. Then the other thing that would have been nice is if you tapped the button that brings up the echoes menu, it would just switch to the next echo. So even though it's a bit more limited, you could have had this ability to switch echoes without ever opening up a menu, which would have been super nice. I mean, the bottom of the D-pad isn't even used for anything, so that could have worked great for this. Now, my next issue is a simple one: performance. The performance is really bad. The stuttering you experience all over the place is super noticeable, and this really shocked me if I'm being honest. I understand the Switch isn't exactly a new console, but I really don't see what is so demanding about this game for the performance to be like this. Even considering the effect and abilities of echoes, it just shouldn't be this bad. With that said, now it's time for my biggest issue with the game. This is once again me warning that there is about to be some major spoilers. So skip ahead using the timestamps below if you don't want to be spoiled. And with that out of the way, this issue I have has to do with one of the most important aspects of any Zelda game: the dungeons. And yes, I know what you're thinking. How could the dungeons be my biggest issue if I just praised them earlier? Well, that's because it's more so a lack of a dungeon. The final area of the game is basically a straight hallway with either enemies or basic puzzles. It doesn't feel like any creativity went into this area, which is a shame, because they do one of the coolest things here, which is as Princess Zelda, you team up and work alongside Link. It's like you're finally getting to see the outside perspective of when you play as Link, and it's really badass. Definitely against the final boss, Noel. The way you use all of Zelda's abilities to help Link in battle is awesome. And it makes me wish we would get a new dedicated co-op Zelda game starring Link and Zelda working together like this. Could be a really interesting experience if done right, and I really wish we could have gotten an entire proper dungeon with these two working together. My other issue I have with this end part of the game ties back to the Swordfighter form being nothing more than a tacked on safe idea, is the fact that you lose the ability to use this form when you free Link, so all the hard work you have done to upgrade it has kind of been for nothing. Like, yeah, Link is running around being a badass with all these cool upgraded weapons you have made, but it's like watching someone else take credit for all the hard work you did. Just a bit disappointing for me. But with all that said, I still really enjoyed The Legend of Zelda Echoes of Wisdom. The art style and music is fantastic. The ways you're able to tackle different problems or enemies with Zelda is interesting in a fun way. The story is pretty much your usual Zelda stuff, and even though I think it was a missed opportunity not having Zelda be vocal, since she's almost in a sense the voice of Link that drives the story forward in other Zelda games, I still enjoyed the different characters and how they reacted differently to Zelda compared to Link. Not to mention, hearing people talk about Link to you from an outsider's perspective was pretty interesting as well. Now, would I recommend Echoes of Wisdom? Absolutely, and I wouldn't mind seeing Zelda be the main character for all 2D Zelda games going forward, while Link stays the main character in 3D. It would be a great way to allow both characters and the games that are in to stay fresh.